Welcome back to the table. Ryan and I just played, you won't guess this, well you might, Scholars of the South Tigris. We just got this game and we had to get it to the table immediately because, I mean, it doesn't seem very long ago that we played
Wayfarers of the South Kingdom, which was the first game in the South Tigris series. This is the second game in the South Tigris series and comes with what I think is one of the most interesting themes we've seen from him. This game takes place, again, along the South Tigris. It takes place during the Abbasid Caliphate, which is considered to be kind of the golden age of learning of Islam. And it's represented here by these scrolls of knowledge. You're effectively being sent out to accrue these scrolls from all different areas around the world, and they come to you in all of these different languages, Hebrew and Chinese and Sanskrit. And your job is to translate these scrolls into Arabic by hiring translators into your shared board that players can use in order to kind of help you translate these scrolls. And of course, there's a lot of different processes involved in getting from point A to point B. But that is a theme I think is really cool. Just the idea that really you're just trying to gather as much knowledge represented by these different tracks. And you're kind of just going up those tracks as you gain the different facets of knowledge.
Yeah, it's really, at its core, like Ryan said, it is about translation. And again, there's a lot of things going on here. We'll get to that in a second. But you're taking these scrolls from here. And this is how I would teach it. Take the scrolls, you get them over here, and then you have translators down here that you can use to translate those scrolls. Because it's a bit of a process. If you have a scroll that's, say, in Persian, I have a translator down here that knows Persian and Arabic.
Perfect.
So we're good. That's just one translator you need. You pay that person 1 gold and you'll be able to do any Persian language scroll over here. However,
it's rarely that simple.
It's rarely that simple. Sometimes you have something, say, that's in Chinese. And Chinese seems to be, at least in the game we played, one of the harder ones to get, because then you're going to need to involve more than one translator. Because when you translate a scroll, you might have to go from Chinese to Greek, or Greek to Hebrew. Persian, and then Persian to. So you're going to have a lot of gold to pay all those translators. And like any of these games, and particularly Wayfarers, there are going to be things that involve these cards potentially or eventually coming down under your board if they are ones that you hired, and if they've been paid like this total amount here, they're going to ultimately come down and then enhance a lot of the actions you take. And let's talk about the fact that you're taking actions.
Yeah,
here.
It's a very interesting loop. And if that didn't give you enough to think about, there's really only 4 actions you're taking in the game. You're recruiting people down to this room, you're recruiting translators, you're traveling around the world map, getting these scrolls and effectively returning them to the guilds. You're moving up these different influence tracks to gain knowledge, and then you're translating those scrolls. So it feels like it's very simple. Okay, we're just doing those actions. But there's another layer to this game, something else that I have never seen before, in that you're going to be getting a variety of different colors of dice, and you're combining these dice together to take actions, and you're actually manipulating and changing the colors of the dice in order to perform different actions, which is wild.
Yeah, on your turn, you're going to be placing one of your cards, and everyone has basically the same set of action cards. Each action card has 2 spaces for dice, and then it has a rest action, which we'll get to in a minute. But you're going to play that card in one of those spaces of the action you want to take, and then you're going to power that action with dice. Now, some of the actions require colored dice, some of them don't. You know, if you're hiring
just numbers.
If you're hiring a translator, it's the value that matters, and you can put up to 2 dice on the card, and then use those dice, for instance, to hire a translator. When you hire a translator, you can do 1 of 2 things. You can bring it down here and pay to basically room them, or you can effectively dismiss them and take a bonus on their card immediately.
Which should seem pretty familiar to fans of these games. I like that he has those multi-use options a lot.
Right, but there are other actions that require specific colors. If you're wanting to go up any of these tracks, they're all associated with the colors. Now, there's primary colors, blue, yellow, and red, but then there's the secondary, purple, orange, and green. And this is where the dice manipulation comes in. And it is so satisfying, but at the same time,
a little complicated.
Pretty complicated in your headspace, because If you're using white dice, you could use these other workers to say change one of them to red and one of them to blue.
You
and
can dye them effectively.
Yeah, you're dyeing them. Now, if you're using 2 dice, say they're 2 white die, and then I use a red worker to make one red and a blue one to make one blue, now they're purple.
Right.
Because you have a red and a blue die on the action, so now you effectively have the purple. It is a really interesting mechanism. It reminds me, it's not exactly like this, and the game's very different, but the dice manipulation that we experienced in Woodcraft late last year, where you're utilizing the die in so many different ways to manipulate them to get done what you want to get done.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I also want to say, like, this to me is the opposite. It does what I wanted Woodcraft to do, right? Because Woodcraft gives you this mechanic to cut dice and whatever. You barely use it.
You have to earn into it.
You have to earn into it. In this game, you're basically starting with a giant pool of white dice, and so you're changing the colors of these dice right away. You're spending workers. Oh, if I have a blue die and a white die, you combine them, it's blue. The whole value of the dice is blue. So you can take some really high blue actions. You can also just earn other colored dice and eventually start culling out your white dice. So there's this whole puzzle element of like trying to take specific actions or hire specific translators that give you abilities that let you cull out the white dice and eventually replace them with the blue dice, the other color, blue, red, yellow, and then combine the blue and red to make the purple, etc. But you can always supplement that with the workers. So of course, going to other places and trying to get workers in. This is not one of those games where it's not worker placement at all. It's dice placement. So those workers just exist to effectively dye the color of your particular action. And if that sounds like a lot, it is. This is maybe, I think, the most brain-burny of his games that I've played yet.
Yeah, I would say this is the heaviest game that I've played
from Shem?
From Garphill.
Yeah.
With that said, if you've played Wayfarers, I would say this. I think Wayfarers mechanically and the flow and the structure of what you're doing in Wayfarers might be more complicated than this. Because what you're doing in this is pretty straightforward by comparison in terms of what you're doing on your turn.
Yeah, playing a card, taking the action.
But all the things that you're calculating in your head to manipulate the dice, then to plan, because you might, you take an action where you take a colored worker. Well, you really need to consider, okay, what dice do I have? What's my next action I want to take? What's the action after that I want to take? To use these different colored workers to manipulate those dice on future turns. So there's a lot of things going on. Almost everything you're doing, every little bit of an action you're taking, you're like, well, I got to think about this. I can't just willy-nilly grab a yellow worker.
However, I will say that complicatedness aside, what you kind of said to get into the flow of it, it's not so bad. This is maybe one of his most satisfying games.
Yeah.
Because when you're playing these cards down, a lot of these cards, they all will trigger a basic action. And then a lot of these cards will have some kind of other brown action. And then as you progress through the game and you start retiring your translators and bringing them down to the bottom, you're triggering those actions as well. And you're doing these in any order. So you can really feel smart. Okay, I really need this card to be blue. I don't have a blue die. Oh, but I have this translator that lets me take any color worker. Let me take a blue worker. Then I can apply that blue worker to that die when you take the main action. Now it's a blue action. And you're triggering these off, like I said, as you need them. And then, of course, the actions you're doing are all giving you stuff. As you're traveling, you're getting resources, and you're getting cards, you're getting influence in the guilds, you're going up these tracks, and you're getting supplementary rewards as you move up. When you're recruiting people, you're covering spaces, you're just getting so much stuff. Every single turn feels like you're just racking in things. And that isn't even talking about like the rest action.
Yeah, the rest action, it extends into the rest action because, again, I'll compare it to Wayfarers. In Wayfarers, there is that sort of rest period, and you trigger off all your cards in an order. But those cards are they're static, right? Once they're there, they're there. In this game, the cards that you trigger for the rest are the cards that you've been playing all round. So, and I will tell you this, the order can matter.
It definitely matters, yeah.
Because there are some cards that trigger, a lot of them trigger firing off, taking the rewards of wherever you're at.
Harvesting, what they call it. And you'll notice that these solid color spots, you'll get that reward every time you rest with that particular card. So I have a card that lets me harvest the yellow track. I get that top reward, which I actually used that quite a bit to call out white dice. It was very helpful.
But some of those require payment of something. So early on in the game, you might have to do something to get something. So when you play those cards, you might want to trigger off one of those cards first so you get the thing you need to pay for the other thing. That sort of thing goes on here. Like for instance, this green track, eventually as you go up it, you're able to increase yourself on another track.
Yeah.
So I got to a point where I was always playing my green card
first
play
it leftmost
so that I could always get another track up and then maybe benefit from it in a better way during the rest.
And that's the thing you have to think about too. When you're playing these cards on your action board, you have all these action spots, and you can unlock. Everyone gets kind of a goal card that lets you unlock a special card, which is just better. Plus, it gives you another spot to place. But as you're taking these actions, you might want to take the influence action first. And so you go to play a card there, and you're like, wait a minute, I need this card to be over here.
Yeah.
What do I need to be my third card? And then you have to kind of make sure you play them in the right order. And that can be a little tricky as well. But again, very satisfying once you trigger it all and you see your plan kind of fall into place and you start getting and spending things in a way that you can end your rest phase with just a ton of dice, a ton of resources, and things like that.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of different ways, like we said, to score points. But I would say the core, at least the end game scoring, the big part of the end game scoring, collecting and completing a lot of these scrolls are basically what's going to give you a lot of and a wide variety of different scoring opportunities. Not to mention climbing up these tracks, the translators that you are able to retire and bring below your board. And then throughout the game, as you go through the scroll stack, there are 4 scoring cards that come out. They're kind of staggered throughout there. And it's kind of interesting because there's going to be times where you take cards off the bottom of that stack so you can eat into those scoring cards quickly. Those 4 scoring cards come out, it's going to trigger the end of the game, but those 2 are opportunities at 4 stages throughout the game to score some points, which is related to having influence, yet again, like Wayfarers, in these 3 tracks here.
Yeah, and that's cool too because you can get some in-game victory points, or you can get like a smaller amount of victory points plus a die, or you can get just a free retirement. You can retire one of the guys directly to the bottom of your board, making one of your actions better. And what's neat is all throughout the game, you're kind of competing for control of those 3 guilds, like in Wayfarers. And they are worth in-game scoring if you manage to maintain control of them. But every time one of these Caliph scoring cards is drawn, it's going to go left to right. And whoever's in control of each guild is going to decide if they want to send one of their markers up there to effectively score those points at the end of the game, which might give control of that guild now to another player who now has more than you. And then everyone else gets kind of a consolation bonus as well. So there's a lot that's going on with these guilds and these scoring cards throughout the game because you never know when one of those is going to pop up. So you always want to try to make sure that you have some kind of presence or some kind of control of those guilds as well.
Yeah, as you can tell just by the way we're explaining it, there's a lot going on in this. And we will probably do more content, maybe a video that really gives you a good overview of what you're doing on your turn, maybe even a round 1 so that you can see this game in action. But for this video right here, I do want to talk about who we think this is for, who we think it's not for, based after just this one play. And I would say the person this is for, and this is maybe a cop-out, you'll have to keep me honest here, if you're a fan of Garfield games in general, and you've been hungry for the next heaviest game on that. Like, in fact, we said the same thing about Wayfarers. We felt when it came out it was probably the heaviest game or one of
and I wondered if they were going to get heavier, and it looks like I was right because this definitely feels heavier.
I definitely think this is heavier. If you're looking for a brain burnery game that has a lot of those same sorts of things that you appreciate from all of their games, but particularly Wayfarers, you're going to find this very satisfying. Not to mention, this has a really great feedback loop on the things you're doing on almost every turn.
Yeah.
Because you're able to feel very satisfied with some of these little tiny combos you're able to build and things like that.
I'd also like to add that if you're somebody that's looking for a mechanic that you've never seen before, I have never seen a mechanic like this.
With the dice.
With the dice, where you're placing dice that you're placing, the blue and the yellow to take a green action. That's very cool. And I don't think I have not seen that. If there's another game, please let me know in the comments. Because I think that's a really cool idea.
Well, and even if there is, that goes hand in hand with the complexity. Because like we said, you're not only combining dice, but then you're using the different workers to change the dice. So you could have a couple dice with workers stacked on top that kind of make it into a color that you would not have expected just by having some resources like that in front of you. So
yeah.
Who's it not for?
Who's it not for?
If you don't want your brain pouring out of your ear sockets then maybe this is not for you, because this is a rough game, as you could probably gather already. I will also say this, at least for your first few plays, this is going to be a longer game. Like, I think this, with 4 people who've never played it, there's a significant opportunity for people to want to spend a lot of time planning each little decision they make.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely not for you if you're looking for a quicker Euro experience.
No.
Our 2-player game was over 2 hours.
Yeah.
And
it was our first play.
It was our first play. But if we had 4 players all playing it for the first time, that probably would have been over 3 hours for sure.
I can't imagine a 4-player game of this being less than 2+ hours.
Yeah,
Do you?
No. This is, I mean, there's just so much and you're doing so much on your turns. But that being said, overall, like, I like heavier games. I like longer games. And I like games where I get to go ba 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 and trigger off a ton of different things in a row.
Who doesn't?
Right. And so, for me, this hit a lot of those notes, although I would not bring this to a bunch of random people. Like, I might bring a game like Architects of the West Kingdom or Raiders of the North Sea, which I feel like are a little bit more beginner friendly.
Yeah, and with that said, there's a lot of games that I don't like long games in general. But there are certain games I've played that I enjoy, like I said, the satisfaction you're getting on your turn. And then I would even say whatever downtime there might be, you can't spend enough time planning your next action.
Oh, I mean, that is fair. You could use that time.
You have plenty to do while everyone else is going, because you can really think about everything that's going. And there's some things might change on the board and you might need to adjust. So things like Underwater Cities, that I've played some really long games of that. Ark Nova, really long games of that. But I enjoy them and they don't feel very long. Even though this took as long as it did for us, I didn't feel like, oh, I'm just waiting.
Because you really are spending a lot of time in intense concentration. And again, if that sounds fun to you, then this game is definitely for you, which I like that. I like having to like really plan out your turn, because this is a game where you can really hurt yourself if you get to your turn and you have the perfect action planned out, which we did a couple times.
Yeah.
You have the perfect action, you realize, oh, I need a blue action, and I have no way of making this action blue. Or I need 3 gold or 2 gold to trigger this, and I only have 1. Like,
the gold thing,
get there a lot.
Yeah, that trips you up where you're like, oh, I think I've got this, and you're missing the one little
you're
cog.
You're 1 silver short, 1 gold short.
Like, there was a couple times where I'm going to do this. I placed my dice, and then I'm like, oh, no, I don't have the gold that I need.
Yeah,
so there was some rewinding. Anyway, that is, if you consumed all of that, our first experience having just played Scholars of the South Tigris.
Yep.
If you have any questions at all, please make them in the comments below. We'll answer what we can. We're probably going to get it played a little bit more before the next time.
I'm excited to play again now that I kind of have it a little bit under my belt.
Yeah, I would like to play it with 3 players. Maybe we'll get Emily here.
Yeah, 4 might be a bit much.
We can play 3. 4, I'm not so sure. But like I said, if you have any questions, let us know. And of course, until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.